Stop for a moment. Before you scroll away, before you tell yourself that this is just another message meant for somebody else, listen to this carefully. What if the reason this message feels strangely personal is not because you have been looking for another prediction about your future, but because there is something about who you have become that you still have not fully recognized? Something rare, something quiet, something that did not appear because life was easy. It appeared because life tested you, and that is what makes this different. You may have spent years asking yourself why certain things happened the way they did. Why did some people leave when you thought they would stay? Why did opportunities disappear just when you were ready for them? Why did certain doors close without explanation? Why did you sometimes feel like you were moving through life differently from everyone around? And perhaps the strangest part is this: you may have looked at those experiences and thought they were proof that something was wrong with you. But what if some of those experiences were actually revealing something that was already inside you? Something you could not have discovered during an easy life. Something that only became visible when you had to keep going without having all the answers. That is the part I want you to understand today, because when this message says that heaven noticed something rare about you, it does not mean you should imagine yourself as superior to everyone else. It means something much deeper. There may be a quality in you that became stronger through your journey without you even realizing it. And perhaps you have been so focused on surviving the season that you never stopped to notice what the season was building inside you. Think about that. Sometimes we measure our lives by what we gained: the relationship, the money, the opportunity, the recognition, the success. But there are things that cannot be measured that way: patience, discernment, compassion, emotional strength, the ability to recognize what is real and what is not, the ability to walk away from something you once desperately wanted because you finally understood that it was not healthy for you, the ability to remain kind without allowing everyone access to your heart. Those things do not always look impressive from the outside, but they can completely change a person's life. And maybe that is why you have felt different lately. Maybe you have noticed that certain things no longer excite you the way they used to. Certain conversations feel empty, certain relationships feel forced, certain environments make you feel exhausted instead of fulfilled. And perhaps you have wondered, why am I changing? The answer may be simpler than you think. You are beginning to recognize yourself. Not the version of yourself that needed everyone else's approval, not the version that constantly explained itself, not the version that stayed where it was uncomfortable simply because leaving felt frightening. A different version, a more honest version. And here is where the mystery becomes even deeper. You may think the rare thing about you is something you were born with, but perhaps it is something you developed without realizing it, something life could have destroyed. But somehow it did not. Maybe life made you more careful, but it did not completely remove your compassion. Maybe disappointment made you wiser, but it did not make you incapable of love. Maybe rejection taught you boundaries, but it did not turn your heart into stone. That balance is rare, because there are people who become bitter after being hurt. There are people who become completely closed after betrayal. There are people who stop believing in anything meaningful after disappointment. But perhaps you went through some of those same experiences, and somewhere inside you, something remained alive. A small sense that your life still mattered. A small voice that kept saying, "Keep going," even when you could not explain why. Maybe you have had moments when you were completely exhausted, yet you still found a reason to get up the next morning. Maybe you have cried privately and then walked back into the world as if everything was normal. Maybe nobody knew how much you were carrying, and maybe that is exactly why you underestimated your own strength. Because you were looking for something dramatic. You were expecting a giant sign, a miracle, a sudden event, a moment where everything became obvious. But sometimes the rarest thing about a person is not dramatic at all. Sometimes it is the quiet ability to keep your heart alive while life is teaching you how to protect it. If that describes something you have experienced, you can tell me in the comments what you think changed most inside you over the last few years. Not what happened outside you, what changed inside you. Because that distinction matters. And there is another part of this that you may not have considered. What if the reason you have not recognized this quality is because you have been comparing yourself to the wrong people? You may have looked at someone else's progress and thought, they are ahead of me. You may have seen someone else's relationship and thought, why did I not receive that? You may have watched other people achieve things while you were waiting. And slowly, without realizing it, you started measuring your value by visible results. But visible results are not the only evidence of growth. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens where nobody can see it. You become less reactive. You become more discerning. You stop chasing people. You stop begging for explanations. You stop forcing doors. You become comfortable with silence. You begin listening to your own conscience. You begin noticing patterns you ignored before. And one day you realize, I am not the same person anymore. That realization can be uncomfortable, because growth often requires you to say goodbye to a version of yourself that once kept you safe. The old version needed constant reassurance. The new version can sit with uncertainty. The old version wanted every question answered immediately. The new version understands that some answers arrive through time. The old version tried to hold on to everything. The new version understands that some things must be released, and perhaps heaven noticed that shift before you did. Not because someone handed you a certificate saying you were special, not because you were promised an easy life, but because your response to difficulty began to change. You started seeing meaning where you once saw only pain. You started asking better questions. Instead of, why is this happening to me? You began asking, what is this teaching me? That is a completely different way of living. And once that shift happens, you cannot always go back. But there is still one question. What exactly did all of this reveal about you? Because we have only reached the surface. There is a deeper reason your journey may have felt so different. And when you understand it, some of the moments you once considered failures may look completely different. Stay with this. There is a reason. The most important qualities in a person are often discovered during uncomfortable seasons. You do not discover patience when everything happens on your schedule. You discover patience when you have to wait. You do not discover discernment when everyone around you is honest. You discover discernment when you have to learn the difference between someone's words and their intentions. You do not discover emotional strength when everything feels secure. You discover it when something changes and you have to find your balance again. That is why your story may contain chapters you wish you could erase, because some chapters were not there to define you, they were there to reveal you. Think about the people who entered your life. Some made you feel seen. Some made you question yourself. Some encouraged you, some disappointed you, some disappeared without giving you the closure you wanted. And perhaps you spent a long time wondering why certain connections did not last. But sometimes the purpose of a connection is not permanence. Sometimes it is revelation. A person can enter your life and reveal a boundary you did not know you needed. Another can reveal how deeply you are capable of caring. Another can reveal a pattern you must never repeat. And another can show you exactly what peace feels like by showing you what peace is not. This is why you should be careful about calling every painful chapter meaningless. You may not have liked the lesson, but the lesson can still have changed you. And perhaps this is what heaven noticed. You learned, you adapted, you became more aware. But you did not completely lose yourself. That is important, because there is a difference between becoming guarded and becoming wise. There is a difference between becoming cold and becoming discerning. There is a difference between no longer trusting everyone and no longer trusting anyone. You may have learned the first without becoming trapped in the second. That is rare. Maybe you once gave too much of yourself to people who did not understand your value. You answered every call. You explained every decision. You tried to fix every misunderstanding. You carried responsibilities that were not yours. And eventually, something inside you became tired. Not tired of loving, tired of abandoning yourself in the process of loving others. That realization can change everything, because suddenly you understand that boundaries are not hatred. Silence is not always anger. Walking away is not always failure. And choosing peace does not mean you stopped caring. It can mean you finally started caring about your own life too. Maybe that is why certain people have noticed a difference in you. Perhaps they cannot explain it. They may simply say, "You seem different," and you might not know how to answer. Because how do you explain years of internal change in one sentence? How do you explain the nights when you had to encourage yourself? How do you explain the moments when nobody cared? But you can recognize it, and there is another sign. You are becoming less impressed by appearances. You may still appreciate success. You may still want beautiful things. You may still have dreams. But something inside you has become more interested in what is genuine. You notice character, consistency, peace, integrity. You notice how someone treats people who cannot benefit them. You notice whether someone's actions match their words. You notice whether a place gives you peace or constantly demands that you become someone you are not. That is discernment, and discernment can feel lonely at first, because once you see certain patterns, you cannot pretend you do not see them. You may outgrow conversations, you may outgrow environments, you may even outgrow dreams that once felt like your entire identity. And that can make you wonder whether you are losing yourself. But sometimes you are not losing yourself. You are losing what was never truly aligned with you. There is a difference, and perhaps your waiting season was connected to this. Maybe you were asking for something to happen immediately. But if it had happened immediately, you might have entered that new chapter with the same habits, the same fears, the same desperation, and the same lack of boundaries. You wanted the door. But maybe you also needed to become ready for what was behind the door. Not perfect, not fearless. Ready. There is a huge difference. Readiness does not mean you have no doubts. It means doubt no longer controls every decision. Readiness does not mean you never get hurt. It means hurt no longer decides who you become. Readiness does not mean you know everything. It means you are willing to learn. And maybe this is why your journey had so many pauses. The pause was not necessarily punishment. Sometimes a pause gives you enough distance to see what you could not see while running. Think about it. When you are emotionally attached to something, everything looks urgent. You want the answer now. You want the person now. You want the opportunity now. You want the breakthrough now. But time can reveal what emotion hides. Months later, you may look back and say, "Thank God that did not happen." The thing you cried over may be the thing you eventually became grateful to have escaped. The door you thought was locked against you may have protected you from a room you were not supposed to enter, and the person you thought you could not live without may have been part of the lesson that taught you how to live without begging someone else to choose you. That does not mean every painful event was planned. It means meaning can be created from what happened. Faith does not require you to pretend everything was good. It allows you to believe that something good can still emerge from what was difficult. And now we reach the most important shift, because if heaven noticed something rare about you, the purpose is not for you to sit around wondering whether you are special. The purpose is to recognize what has been built inside you and use it well. Your sensitivity can become discernment. Your compassion can become service. Your painful experiences can become wisdom. Your waiting can become patience. Your past mistakes can become guidance. Your story can become something that helps another person feel less alone. That is when the rare quality becomes meaningful, not when you admire it, when you live through it. And perhaps you are already seeing signs of this. Maybe you no longer react to things that once consumed you. Maybe you are becoming comfortable saying no. Maybe you have stopped chasing validation. Maybe you are listening more carefully. Maybe you are protecting your peace. Maybe you are beginning to understand that your worth does not rise and fall based on who recognizes it. If that is happening, tell me honestly in the comments, what is one thing you no longer chase that you used to think you could not live without? You do not need to tell your entire story, just one thing, because sometimes naming what you released helps you realize how far you have already come. But there is still one final piece. Because understanding that you have changed is not the same as understanding why that change matters now. Something is shifting in the way you see your future. And the next part is where we finally answer the question we started with. What was so rare, and what are you supposed to do with it now? Part 3. Now you are ready to see what was rare. Now we can return to the title. Heaven noticed something rare about you. After everything we have talked about, perhaps you can see why the answer is not simply, you are special. That would be too easy. The deeper answer is this. You learned how to remain human after life gave you enough reasons to become hard. You learned from pain, without making pain your identity. You became more discerning, without completely losing compassion. You became stronger, without needing to become cruel. You learned to protect your peace, without destroying your ability to love. And perhaps you did not realize how significant that was, because you were too busy surviving it. Think about the moments when you could have become bitter. You had reasons, you had disappointments, you had people who misunderstood you. You had moments when your effort was not recognized. You had seasons when you wondered whether your prayers were even being heard, and yet something inside you kept reaching for meaning. That is the rare thing, not perfection, not superiority, not some magical status that makes you better than other people. It is the capacity to grow without losing your deepest values. That is powerful, because anyone can become harder. But becoming wiser without becoming colder takes work. Anyone can stop caring, but continuing to care while learning boundaries takes courage. Anyone can trust blindly, anyone can distrust everyone, but learning how to discern takes maturity, and maybe that is why you have felt like you are entering a different chapter, because the version of you that needed every answer is slowly becoming. The version of you that can walk forward even when some answers are still missing. That is freedom. You do not need to know exactly how everything will unfold before taking the next honest step. You do not need everyone's approval. You do not need every person from your past to understand your transformation. You do not need to prove that your journey was valid. You lived it, you know what it cost, and now you know what it taught you. There is another important part of this. Do not turn this realization into pressure. You do not have to become extraordinary overnight. You do not have to suddenly fix your entire life. You do not have to interpret every coincidence as a supernatural sign. You do not have to chase some dramatic moment just because a video told you something important is coming. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is simply become honest about where you are. If you are tired, admit that you are tired. If you need rest, rest. If you need to apologize, apologize. If you need to walk away from something unhealthy, walk away carefully and wisely. If you need help, ask for it. If you have a dream, take one practical step toward it. Faith and action can exist together. Hope does not mean sitting still, and believing in a meaningful future does not mean ignoring reality. It means choosing your next step with intention. This is where the title becomes personal. Heaven noticed something rare about you, but now you have to notice it too. Because you cannot build a life around a strength you refuse to acknowledge. If you keep believing that you are weak because you struggled, you will miss the strength hidden inside the struggle. If you keep believing you are behind because your path took longer, you will miss the wisdom created during the waiting. If you keep believing rejection proves you are unworthy, you will overlook the boundaries and self-respect you gained through it. And if you keep comparing your timeline to everyone else's, you may never recognize your own progress. Look at yourself honestly. You are not where you were. Maybe you are not where you want to be. That is okay. Both things can be true. You can still have unfinished areas of your life while being deeply transformed. You can still have questions while becoming wiser. You can still feel afraid while becoming courageous. You can still be healing while becoming stronger. Do not demand perfection from yourself before allowing yourself to acknowledge growth. That is another trap. Sometimes people wait until everything is fixed before they give themselves credit. But growth deserves recognition while it is happening. So tonight, or whenever you hear this message, take a few quiet minutes. Ask yourself 3 questions.